Before I start, on Monday, the Farmington, Connecticut Board of Education voted unanimously to retire its Indian mascot. That follows the Manchester, Connecticut Board retiring its Indian mascot in June of 2019 and Guilford, Connecticut this past June. Glastonbury, Connecticut retired Tomahawks in August, and Fresno High in California retired the Warriors just last night. Hello again. My name is John Kane. I'm a Cambridge graduate from the class of 1978. I live in the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, about 30 miles past Buffalo. I graduated 8th in my class. I was inducted into the National Honor Society as a junior. I served as my class president, vice president, treasurer, and the representative to student council. I was involved with the school's theater program and chorus. I played soccer and baseball, and I wrestled and ran track all at the varsity level for the school. Outside of school, I played baseball as a member of the Fales Half Pints and BJ's Lumber team in Cambridge's Little League program, and I played for the Whistle Stop, Cambridge's Pony League baseball team. I also want to add that one of my children was born here in Cambridge, and in fact, so was my wife, right here at Mary McClellan Hospital. My classmate and dear friend Joanne Peters helped deliver my daughter right here and has remained in touch with her to this day. I am Mohawk, or Gunyagahaga. My Gunyagaha name is Garhio. My wife of 38 years is Oneida, or Onyotaaga, as are my 3 children. I have 9 grandchildren from 5 years old to 17. I am a Native activist, radio show host, podcaster, and YouTuber. My radio shows air in New York City and in Washington, D.C. I have written weekly newspaper columns, and I've been an invited speaker at universities from Arizona State University to Hofstra, Adelphi, SUNY Potsdam, and many more. I have spoken at the Carnegie Endowment for World Peace and the United Nations. I have also spoken at grade schools, middle schools, and high schools. As an activist, I have advocated and fought for our children, Native sovereignty, land claims, Native economic development, our regulatory advantages, environmental protections, and against poverty, discrimination, missing and murdered Indigenous women, police violence, and the use of Native mascots by schools, colleges, professional sports, and other organizations. I have testified in court as an expert witness on Native issues in 2 separate trials, and that testimony has been used and submitted in other legal proceedings. My request. Today, I am formally requesting that this board begin the process of removing and retiring the Cambridge Central Schools nickname and logo and to stop the use of its race-based mascot. I know this issue was raised 20 years ago, but it was never properly or adequately addressed. One man who I knew, respected, and even loved ended the debate back then. David Bobo Haños stood before this community and spoke as the sole representative of Native voices, silencing any of the opposition voices and ending the debate with his support and admiration of the Cambridge Indians' name. He had only one request, that the logo be changed to reflect an image more in the likeness of Native people indigenous to the area. As per that request, the logo was changed, but there was no board vote on the mascot issue that was already becoming a national conversation, from Washington, D.C. over its NFL franchise to strict rules handed down by the NCAA on colleges with Native-themed mascots to grade schools and high schools throughout the U.S. and Canada using a variety of Native images, names, and references for their schools' identities. At that time, I was one of only 2 Native students to perhaps have ever graduated from CCS. The other was my sister, Jackie, class of 76. I was never asked for my opinion on the matter, nor was she. No Native nation, advocacy group, activist, scholar, leader, historian, teacher, or community member was ever asked. So one man and his family became the permission that made Cambridge special and somehow exempt from scrutiny over using a generic term for Native people, predominantly for sports teams. I don't recall the band or chorus or any other non-sports related school organization calling themselves or being called the Indians. Many people worked for many years, including over the last 20 years, to keep the pressure on those who failed to see the wrong and harm created by promoting racial stereotypes, misrepresenting Native imagery, and treating Native people as cartoons, Hollywood images, or simply relics of the past. Prominent universities, several professional sports franchises, and many grade schools and high schools dropped their Native mascots. Millions of dollars have been spent over trademark fights, PR campaigns, polling, and to prop up any Native face or voice, or those claiming to be, to defend Native mascots and talk about what an honor it is. Native leaders, nations, Native organizations, trade groups, and Native activists all pushed back on those campaigns, but still had trouble being heard on the subject. Those of us in the activist community stepped up in the wake of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor killings. Social justice and racial equity calls saw people spill out into the streets of major cities and even across many more rural communities. Native movements teamed up with other marginalized peoples. Black Lives Matter became a calling card for all of us. And finally, our voices were being heard. Columbus statues were toppled as Confederate monuments came down. And the most belligerent force against the Not Your Mascot movement caved. The Washington NFL franchise abandoned their racial slur of a name without even a replacement. The Washington Redskins were no more. For now, they are simply the Washington football team. But not everyone has yielded in spite of the mounting evidence of the ill effects Native mascots have on generations of students. Child development experts and psychologists, including from the American Psychological Association, wrote papers and published reports, all affirming the harm inflicted on children and society as a whole by reducing Native people to these dehumanizing objects. This objectification of marginalized people crossed other lines as well. The machismo associated with the imagery of the hyper-masculine warrior has contributed to bullying and physical abuse in some instances. The LGBTQ are particularly vulnerable in these environments. Fetishizing Native people and Native women and girls in particular has only contributed to the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. 1 in 3 Native women will be raped, and more than half will experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. This is not unrelated to imagery and messaging. Causation or correlation? Or is it some of both? UN conventions have been signed to address discrimination of this very sort. In 2007, the UN passed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Ending discrimination and discriminatory policies and practices are a major part of its text. Free, prior, and informed consent is a requirement in this international declaration for a full range of policies with implications on Native lives. And that consent must be explicit and properly sourced. Campaigns at the national level and at state levels to end bullying and discrimination have produced laws like the Dignity for All Students Act. Native mascots have been at the center of human rights charges in several states, and concern over such laws have moved other districts to make changes. A greater emphasis on racial equity and anti-discrimination laws are having more impact than ever. Clearly, the financial interests that drove the Washington NFL franchise to change what they swore they never would saw the problems with race-based names and mascots. So in spite of a devoted fan base and an organization committed to keeping its name and logo, change came to Washington. The current pandemic only contributed to making the change. The risk of losing a season loomed far heavier than losing the controversial team name this year. And when most of the pandemic is behind us, the team will celebrate its new name, bust out their new merchandise to a new wave of fans. Last month, when I came to Cambridge to begin this conversation, I was clear about how I felt about this town and my high school. Some have tried to characterize my visit home as an attack on this community. The WAMC headline for their coverage of the story read, "Cambridge School Hears Call to Replace Racist Mascot." That is not my quote, nor is it my description of the school's mascot or the people of this town. It is a race-based mascot, and that is how I described it. That's undeniable, but it may be difficult for some to acknowledge. I have described the use of race-based mascots as, at very least, a demonstration of white privilege, and at worst, overt racism. How members of this community respond to changing the mascot will determine what is demonstrated here, not me. An exercise. I call the CCS mascot a race-based mascot because that is what it is. But the reality is only Native people are used in this manner. Why is that? Is it because the dominant culture has trouble recognizing Native people as a race? Government forms list Native Americans as a choice for race, although CNN just lists something else for a race other than white, black, Latino, or Asian. I don't know. Can you think of any other racial or ethnic group used in this manner? Or any other culturally distinct people? Well, how about as an exercise? What if we try it with someone else? Another group of people. Many here believe using a Native mascot is respectful and honor. What if black people are used? Why not? Black people are proud and noble, and some of America's greatest athletes are black. And this is predominantly about sports. What word or name would you use? Now, I'm not suggesting any overtly racist names here. Nothing as bad as, let's say, the R word, redskin. But what would you use? Blacks? Africans? African Americans? Negroes? Colored people? Are you uncomfortable yet? What about the image? Barack Obama? Bo Jackson? Martin Luther King? Jesse Owens? How about an imaginary image, an African warrior, or some generic black athlete? Do you see the problem here? Maybe that was too tough, too racially charged. What about using a race that is more identifiable for Cambridge? White people. Again, let's eliminate the names meant to be derogatory. No crackers, honkies, rednecks, or hillbillies. Although you do have nice hills here. What about Americans? Americans are white, right? I mean, unless you put a word in front of it. Yeah, that might be racist. Well, there's always Caucasians. Or if you want to really portray dominance, there's Aryans. Yeah, this one's pretty tough too. And what about the logo or actual mascot? What image would you use to represent white folks? A soldier? A farmer? Maybe a rich guy? How about Trump? He's white. Do you see the problem here? How could a race-based mascot only work if the race is native? It doesn't. The current logo. This is not some specifically crafted or custom artwork or graphic design specifically produced to capture the charm or character of Cambridge or the native people indigenous to this area. It's clip art. It's the same logo used by dozens of other schools and organizations. It's every bit as stereotypical as any other cartoon or caricature used for this purpose. It's generic. It's a public domain image that has been passed off as Seneca, Mohawk, Huron, Mohican, Pequot, and every other woodland native up and down the East Coast. It's not unique to Cambridge, nor was it drawn by some venerable native artist or elder for your use. As I said, it's an unprotected by copyright public domain image, just like the big C with the feathers hanging off the back. I saw an image of some t-shirts that were being sold to support the Save the Mascot effort here. Ironically, the image was your logo in whiteface, and I literally mean ironically. The word on this was that they were prohibited from altering the logo because it was specifically designed or approved by some native person. This is simply hogwash. It's not true. The name. We are not Indians. Your clip art logo is not an Indian. The word is a misnomer. It's a mistake. It's an uncorrected mistake from over 5 centuries ago. The word was imposed on Native people, just another form of the erasure that some here are accusing me of. It is, like the logo, generic. It has become a word to lump us all together generically, kind of like CNN's something else. It ignores our distinction and leaves it entirely up to you to decide who or what it means. And to that, what Indians are you calling yourselves? Clearly, it used to be the Plains indigenous peoples, judging by the old logo. But what now? Is your current logo tied to your knowledge of history and the history of the native peoples of this area? That was Dave Hanyo's intent when he recommended the change. So what is it? Huron, Mohican, Mohawk? Ones that fought alongside the Dutch, the French, the British, the colonists? And how did that work out for them? Where did they go? When did they leave? Why did they leave? Are you claiming the identities of all the native people who lived in the region or just the last ones? So who do you claim your logo to represent? Do you know? Do you even care? The word is meaningless. And like the use of native mascots, it's rejected more and more by native people. The Seneca Nation is listed by the federal government as the Seneca Nation of Indians. But they are dropping that unnecessary and meaningless label. The Seneca Nation is actually transitioning to the word they call themselves in their own language, Onondaga. But you know the word is wrong. How do I know you know? Because you don't call me or the Hanyos Indians, unless, of course, Cambridge is stuck out in front of it. No one does. I've heard a bunch of people from the area weighing in on this debate who claim to have some level of native blood or ancestry. None of them claim to be Indians. They all claim to be Native Americans or partly Native Americans. No one calls us Indians or Redskins or Redmen or Red Raiders or any of the other words that some claim are meant to honor us. Why? Because they don't. You call us Native Americans, Indigenous people, First Nations, or maybe just Native. Some will actually do us the courtesy of asking us how we prefer to be referred to ourselves. If you knew any better, you'd call us Ongoyumwe. That's our word. It means a real human being or original human being. And by original, we mean original to the land, tied to the land both in the past and into the future. But Indians, you know it's wrong. The Hanyos know it's wrong too. They are not Indians. They do not have Indian blood running through their veins. They have Onondaga and Oneida blood running in them. Onondaga, Onyotaaga, the people of the hills, the people of the standing stones. I am not Indian. I am Gunyagahaga, the people of the land of Flint. And my people were among the people who lived here long before any of you or your ancestors. Some have said this is a bad time to confront the issue, that people are struggling and need to be comforted with as much normalcy as possible, that taking this away now would be devastating, that it would be upsetting to the children. It sure seems like the most upset about even talking about it are far from school age. This is actually a perfect time. As I mentioned earlier, both the calls for racial equity and social justice and the pause caused by COVID-19 made this the right time for the Washington football team. And the same goes for Cambridge. The 2021 school year may be one that everyone wants to put behind them. Who could imagine high school sports canceled, graduations from last year severely altered, and remote classes becoming the rule rather than the exception? But who is it tougher on? Our kids or us adults? This isn't about making change under the cover of COVID-19, but death and illness should put priorities in order. Retiring the inappropriate mascot while sports is on pause and while students are not consumed by mascots and pep rallies does make this the right time. Putting a mascot that most know needs to change behind them will allow CCS students to celebrate a new beginning post-COVID. Making the change now would be a recognition of the social change that is needed today across the country. This is your opportunity to answer the call for social justice. The school board and administration are undergoing racial equity training, not because or in spite of the mascot, but certainly not in a vacuum. This makes a change now even more timely. It puts it into a broader context. Race-based mascots are an antithesis to cultural sensitivity training and awareness. I hope you use this time wisely. The burden falls on you, the members of this board, to take on this issue. The can has been kicked over and over again by previous boards. 20 years ago, the can was kicked to where we are now. But this time, a Native voice may be telling some what they don't want to hear. Previous boards have avoided the issue. Some of you may have hoped this issue would just go away by itself. Some of you may quietly have hoped the state would mandate a change so that it would not be on your backs. Some of you may believe that kicking the can again is appropriate. Kick it past the pandemic. Kick it past the next budget vote. Kick it past the end of the school year. I might be completely wrong here, but I've seen it elsewhere. This is not a tough decision on what is right and wrong or what's best for the students of this school. It's only tough because of fear over the fallout and the potential backlash from those resistant to change. I hope the people of this community can temper their enthusiasm for what they perceive as tradition and give proper consideration for what has to be done here. Let the new year bring a vote by this board to retire the current mascot and nickname. Let the seniors graduate with a mascot they have known, but also let them participate in selecting a new name and logo for the classes that will follow them. A change does not erase the history. It does not wipe out championships or accomplishments, nor does it shame them. And change does not have to be a big ticket budget item. It can be phased in with normal expenses for uniforms, murals, and banners. There are also organizations that have helped schools transition from Native mascots. I suspect there still are some, but delaying the change may close some of these windows. Half of all schools who have retired their Native mascots in the last decade have done so since 2019. This isn't just a trend, it's a wave. There are many Native stories in Native culture that talk about the struggles of fighting a wave or nature's flow. This is a wave to be ridden, not fought. So I have to ask, what's the plan? Do you plan on following a process used by other schools? Are you developing one on your own? Do you have a timeline? Are you hiring a consultant to assist in the process? Are you involving Dr. Soto from your racial equity training? Is the mascot issue being addressed in that training? And what can I do to help? The last thing I want to say here right now is that this is not about me. It's not about the Hanyos. It's not about nostalgia or any of what some of the adults of this community may be feeling about this. It's about children. Changing the mascot does not fix all the inequities of today, but it does help stop promoting a false stereotype. Removing this race-based mascot does very little by itself, but teaching about why it was retired and some of the true history, especially Native history, can make these kids proud of the change. When they are asked, what did you do during the national call for social justice? They can say, we showed true respect for the Native people who lived here before us. We removed our mascot. The atrocities committed against Native people are too numerous to teach here. But some basic lessons on who we were, who was who, and where we went would be a huge improvement to a school that took a name and an identity from a people and gave little back. I am not a Cambridge Indian, but I am a proud Cambridge graduate. And in spite of what some may think, I have come home to give something back. Change the name. We are not your mascot.